Okay, welcome to a video where we're going to be looking at several ways to improve the pushing movement pattern, starting with mobility correction first. So this first exercise is a self-massage drill, and I often use this with shoulder impingements. So pushing action is very difficult to get right when there's a shoulder issue at base, and the trigger points around this area. These muscles are quite nasty and they will really inhibit the action that you're wanting to do. So if I just take that back for a second, where you're really trying to get the muscles that are just below the armpit there, I could use a small spiky ball, even a small lacrosse ball or golf ball even. So it has to be something quite small and hard. If it's not small and hard, if you're using a big foam roller, you won't be able to get into the muscles that you're needing to target. Releasing these will really help you to improve your pushing movement, especially if there's considerable stiffness that we'd often see with injury. All right, so once you've done that, it's important to follow it up with a basic movement correction. So if you don't have pain, you may not necessarily need to use these, but if you have stiffness, and if you have pain and have trouble doing the pushing movement, then these first two exercises are excellent, and they both basically complement each other. So the last one was mobilizing, this one is stabilizing. This one is very good exercise for scapular control, so really learning how to move that scapula and getting the arms above the head. So it's another problem area with pushing movement, especially if you're trying to get to shoulder press and military press type exercises that can really cause a lot of trouble if you don't have good scapular timing or good postural control. So this movement here is really trying to get the scapula to wrap around the rib cage and coming out wide and around, and really encouraging good use of serratus anterior, which is down the bottom here, and it's really guiding the humerus, the arm bone, up into the correct position so that it stays well within the socket. All right, so a great exercise to use as a warm-up exercise even before overhead movement. Even if you don't have injury, it's a great drill just to use. Good drills to use on the off days too. So again, if you don't have injury, these first two exercises are great to use on the days when you're recovering. All right, so that's the serratus anterior wall slides drill. Once I sort of come out of that, I will go to the floor, and I'll especially again if I've got people with wing scapula, maybe don't have pain, but significant weakness in pushing movements, and I'll get them to start on the floor in a 4-point position. So see, Mel will come down into a 4-point position here, and they're just going to learn to basically protract the shoulder. So really trying to flatten that scapula onto the rib cage. So they'll go into retraction there and then learn how to protract, except trying not to move the entire pelvis to do so. Really just want to try and push through the shoulder blades. So there's that full protraction that you'll see Mel do right there. And that's where she's really getting rid of the wing scapula that she does have herself. So this is warming up to get towards the push-up. So once you've done a few of those, you could actually start to get a bit of the overhead movement involved as well. So as you go into the retraction again, you could start to actually encourage a bit of a push back towards the heels. So and we'll see it here. So it's a bit like the wall slides. Now we're getting the arms into this overhead movement and encouraging more of this scapular wrapping. All right, so it's getting the arms ready to be in this position, but without actually having to lift them. That's the beauty of doing it this way. So it's in this closed chain position of being hands on the floor. Very, very stable. A great way to encourage extra stability and the person to really feel good scapular movement. Really hard for most people to understand how even that works. So these are great drills to use. Again, I use these first four a lot in early days of shoulder rehabilitation, but they're great at warm-up drills prior to me doing chest presses and overhead presses and all the really super demanding things that build incredible strength. All right, so once we've moved away from that, the obvious progression now is the push-up itself. I could go to a kneeling push-up. There's many versions of push-ups, but let's go straight to on the toes push-up, and obviously the strength demands are considerably greater, and you need to ensure that you still get that good protraction at the top there, and Mel's really working quite hard to ensure that happens, because if she doesn't think about it, her scapular winging will be quite pronounced. All right, so once you've done the regular push-up, you could move into the yoga push-up, so basically just adding the downward dog. And for the same reason that we've spoken about several times, this just gets us out of horizontal pushing and now preparing our body into overhead pushing. This one also encourages the extra thoracic extension, and also the use of the pelvis for the first time in terms of maintaining an anterior tilt as well. So several things going on here. It's a lot more integrated than just the regular push-up. Not necessarily easier, just different. All right. Now we're moving into more open chain exercise, and this is the single cable press. Arguably harder than many of the dual ones, but it's a really good choice because it gives great freedom of movement. So firstly, the things that you need to be aware of on this are you're really going to have this first time you start to see the legs involved, really need to have good control of the lunge stance. This back foot is the real key to this. So many people would love to keep the heel flat, and the reason they do that is because they feel more stable. All that does is make them considerably weaker. They'll have a huge energy loss when they're pushing. Now, when you're pushing through, you really need to have that good protraction that you're just working on with the one on the floor, so you've got that wrapping of the shoulder. The opposite arm, it's very important that the opposite arm, the elbow, pulls back. If it drops down too low, you're going to lose control. All right, so a very good exercise. This is developing the anterior sling, so the left leg here, or the right leg here with the left arm, are all connected via one sling. So this is a great exercise to developing that really good core strength and excellent timing for movements that we would use in life that are going to match this, such as throwing balls and even running to some extent. All right, so a single cable press, which then leads us to the next one, which would be the sum of the progressions of the same thing. All right, so let's have a look at those. Okay, so the progression of the single cable is the dual cable, so two arms. A lot simpler in terms of coordination, just a lot more difficult in terms of load, muscular strength. Again, the protraction that you really need at the end there, right at this point. A lot of people with weakness in this pushing action occasionally forget to really get that scapula to wrap around. So it's really got to come so you're flat on the back of the thoracic spine there. Again, the foot position's got to be good, so you need this good lunge stance. If you have weakness in the lunge, you're going to have weakness in this. Very important to do this one before you start messing around with bench presses and stuff. It's always more important to have strength in a standing position first before regressing to, because they're really regressions, lying down exercises. I've never really seen anyone injured from lying down, but I've seen many people injured standing. All right, so now the single cable press of the weight shift. This is where we start to really bring the legs more into play, and also the external obliques. High level of coordination, but very, very functional, excellent for sports. All right, so the key to this movement is the strength of the left leg. All right, so even though we're building incredible strength into this chest, shoulder, tricep region, and we're really relying heavily on the power being built from this leg here, this left leg, and then as it rotates around, then we get the sling involved again. All right, so incredible strength of this exercise transferring into real life movements, especially sports again. All right, so there's another one of developing the pushing pattern. So let's have a look at a couple more others with the overhead movement next. Okay, so before we get to the overhead, we've got to look at the chest press. So my preferred version is with dumbbells, not a barbell. But dumbbells require a hell of a lot more stability. All right, and I'll use a Swiss ball and not a bench. A Swiss ball, again, brings the play into abdominals and core control, as well as glutes and hamstrings. So I'm actually still integrating my entire body into a pushing movement. There's just a hell of a lot more load to combat in this exercise. So two arms, a lot less coordination. Single arm, I could do this as a single arm. It actually enhances a lot more glute and abdominal control. Again, the technique on this one, just make sure that you don't get too low. So you really want to stop at this 90-degree angle here. So I don't want my elbows getting too far down. I don't want them coming too low, so almost like that dumbbell's going to touch my chest. If it touches my chest, it's no good. I've also got to make sure that my body stays really still, so I stay like very horizontal here the entire time. So my glutes have got to stay on the job, as does my abdominals. Again, the ball helps me to encourage more and more of that, just because it can move around on me, where a bench doesn't require me to do anything. All right, so that's our dumbbell chest press, a very popular one with most people in the gym. So now we've done a stack of the horizontal pushing. Now we're going to look at vertical pushing. So now, before I go straight into strengthening, I'm going to use a kettlebell in an inverted style, so it's inverted upside down. Then basically it just encourages greater stability. So strength is not the limiting factor in this particular movement. It's going to be the stability of the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist. The wrist actually plays a big factor in this, especially on the non-dominant hand. I just need to maintain good control of my trunk and my position of my body, and just pushing it straight up and down. So really not a lot in terms of skill from what you can see, but when you're doing it, it's quite difficult. So really encourages you to master the overhead movement before you start putting huge weights in your hand. Once I've got that one, the obvious choice then is to go to a dumbbell. Again, I could go 2 dumbbells, which would be simpler in terms of coordination. I prefer to go with 1, and I'll add a little bit of a squatting action to it, just to give me a bit of an energy assistance in terms of the pushing. It just gives them a lot more freedom in the push overhead movement. I don't need to drop into a full squat. It's more like a partial squat where I'm just bouncing and just pushing it up, a bit like the split jerk exercise in the clean and jerk of weightlifting. All right, so I'm just using the single leg, and then I push down, get a little bit of a twist at the top there, so you can see how my right foot is off the ground, and then I'm just pushing straight up. So it just giving me a little bit more freedom. And again, like what we saw very early on, the scapular placement rolling around on this to just help me get more freedom, so I don't impinge the shoulder. I can still build incredible strength in the deltoids and upper traps, but I'm just really minimizing any potential problems that are going to come about from this overhead thing. Last one is the barbell overhead, so military press or just shoulder press, whatever you want to call it. Again, I'll add that little jerk action to it just to assist any potential blockages, and even if you wanted to go heavier, I'll get a little bit more weight doing it this way than I will if I just stood still. My strength will be driven on the downward part, so I'm more or less cheating with momentum on the upward part. And now I'll just take my time and really lower it, like with a 3 or 4 second timing, and builds the eccentric strength into my shoulders. Again, it just minimizes the risk of potential impingements and tearing supraspinatus tendons and all that sort of stuff. All right, so again, technique on this, just a partial squat and exploding up, and then lock the elbows out at the top, and just try to maintain good posture. There's really not a lot of skill in this. Really, it'll come down to poor mobility if you're going to struggle getting it right. And the mobility will stop you pushing it directly overhead. All right, so the things we did at the start will help you the most on that. All right, so there's our 10 exercises for pushing patterns.